A shattered illusion. I always believed my parents had the perfect marriage. They were the kind of couple everyone admired, the ones who laughed at the same old jokes, finished each other's sentences, and moved in perfect sync. Growing up, I was certain that love, true love, looked just like theirs. My father had a magnetic presence, the kind of charm that made people feel special with just a few words. My mother, on the other hand, was the steady force that held everything together, responsible, nurturing, and endlessly devoted to our family. So when Mom told us she needed to leave for a week to care for my sick grandmother, it didn't seem like a big deal. At the airport, she kissed Dad goodbye, teasing him about surviving without her. He chuckled, pulling her into a warm embrace, promising he'd manage just fine. I remember watching them and thinking how lucky I was to have parents who still cared so deeply for each other after all these years. The first night without her felt different but not unpleasant. Dad ordered takeout, let me stay up late watching movies, and we talked more than we had in a long time. Felt nice, almost like we were reconnecting. But by the second night something was off. He was glued to his phone, grinning at messages he never shared. When I asked what was so funny, he simply brushed it off. By the third day, I noticed subtle but undeniable changes. He started dressing differently, putting extra effort into his appearance, even spraying cologne just to run errands. He left the house at odd hours, offering little to no explanation. At dinner, he barely looked up from his phone, chuckling at something or someone on the other end. I tried to ignore it, but a heavy feeling settled in my stomach. Then, one seemingly insignificant moment changed everything. I was searching for my charger in the living room when I saw his phone screen light up. A message preview flashed before disappearing. "Can't wait to see you again." My chest tightened. I told myself it could mean anything, a friend, a joke. But the way he instantly grabbed his phone the moment he walked in, checking if I had seen anything, told me otherwise. I wanted to believe I was overthinking, that I was just being paranoid. This was my dad, the man who held my mother's hand every Sunday at church, who kissed her forehead before bed. But once I started noticing things, I couldn't stop. The unfamiliar scent of perfume that wasn't Mom's. The hesitation before answering simple questions. The newfound energy in him, as if something or someone had reignited a spark. I convinced myself it was all in my head. Until the night I heard him on the phone. His voice was softer, laced with affection. I only caught fragments of the conversation, but it was enough. Enough to send my stomach plunging. Enough to tell me something was terribly, terribly wrong. From that moment on, I couldn't look at him the same way. Every word he spoke felt hollow, every smile rehearsed. The worst part. How effortlessly he pretended nothing had changed. As if he wasn't betraying everything our family was built on. I wanted to confront him, to make him admit it. But instead I waited. I watched. Days passed. And the weight of what I knew became unbearable. Each night Mom called. Her voice filled with warmth as she asked how we were doing. I could hear how much she missed him. And he played the role of the devoted husband flawlessly, telling her he missed her too, promising he couldn't wait for her to come home. Then, the moment the call ended, he slipped back into his secret life. Texting, sneaking out, lying to both of us. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to confront him. I rehearsed the words in my head over and over, imagining every possible reaction. Would he deny it? Get angry? Try to twist the truth? None of it mattered. I needed to hear it from him. That night, as he sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone, I finally spoke. "Who is she?" His head snapped up. For a brief second. His face was a mask of confusion. Then it shifted. His expression turning guarded. "What are you talking about?" I didn't blink. "The woman you've been seeing. The one you took to the cafe." For the first time in my life, the father I thought I knew was a stranger. The weight of a secret. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in my father's eyes. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, as if searching for the right words. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh and set his phone down. "It's complicated," he said. That was his excuse. Not a denial. Not an apology. Just a weak attempt to justify his betrayal. My hands clenched into fists. Does Mom know? His jaw tightened. This isn't something you'd understand. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped me. I understand enough. I understand that Mom loves you. That she trusts you. And you're lying to her. Does she deserve that? He ran a hand through his hair, looking exhausted. It's not that simple. It is, I shot back. You're either faithful or you're not. And you're not. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging. I never meant for you to find out. Like that made it any better. Like his secret only mattered because now I knew. Something inside me broke in that moment. A piece of me that had always believed my father was a good man. Now I wasn't sure who he was at all. I wanted him to beg me not to tell. To at least acknowledge the damage he had done. But he didn't. He just sat there in silence, as if there was nothing left to say. And maybe there wasn't. Because at that moment I realized something. No matter what I chose to do next, our family would never be the same again. After that night I barely spoke to him. And he didn't try to explain, didn't try to fix things. Maybe he thought if we ignored it, it would go away. But it didn't. It sat between us, an invisible wall that grew taller every day. Mom's return date was approaching, and the thought of it made me sick. She was coming home to a husband who wasn't the man she thought he was. To a home that no longer felt like one. And I had to decide. Would I tell her? I imagined the moment, the betrayal sinking in, the heartbreak breaking her apart. I pictured her face crumbling as the truth settled in. Her voice shaking as she asked why. Why had he done it? Why hadn't I stopped it? Why weren't we enough for him? I hated him for putting me in this position. For forcing me to carry the weight of his choices. The night before she came home, he finally spoke. Are you going to tell her? I looked at him. The man I had once admired more than anyone. Shouldn't you? He sighed, rubbing his face. It's not that simple. I shook my head. It is. He didn't argue. He just nodded like he already knew his time was up. The next day, I stood beside him at the airport, watching as my mother walked toward us, her face lighting up. She was so happy to be home. She kissed him, and for the first time I saw it. The distance in his eyes. The guilt hiding behind his smile. She didn't notice. Not yet. But she would. I had made my decision. As we drove home, she chatted about her trip, completely unaware that the life she thought she was returning to had already crumbled. My father kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, waiting, dreading what I would do. Then she asked, "Did I miss anything?" I opened my mouth, feeling the weight of the truth pressing down on my tongue. One sentence. That was all it would take to change everything. I looked at my father one last time. And then, I made my choice.